Call the Town of Northwood Planning Board meeting of November 8th, 2018 to order at 6:30. Present Joe McCaffrey, Al Kreider, select persons are up, Beth Woodrow, Betty Smith, Vice Chair, Lee Baldwin, Chair Bob Strobel, Susan Austin, Planner, Land Use Secretary, Planner James Burdine.
She's here.
Linda Smith is around somewhere. We have minutes of October 25th.
We do?
No, it was emailed to us.
Emailed.
No, I
didn't
did.
print them
Copies?
because it
Over
said,
there.
Sorry.
it said draft. I didn't print it.
I think they always do.
They're always a draft until you guys approve them.
Yeah,
Exactly. So
that's so we can catch the typos.
I thought we were only doing
general
subset.
content.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Copies of that already.
Yes. No, I didn't take
I
Motion to accept the minutes.
think I passed them out.
Second. I think you passed which out.
Others, talking to James. The review. Does that mean we need minutes or a couple minutes to go over the minutes?
I know, but others do.
Discussion on the motion to approve the minutes as written. I was. Hang on 1 second. Oh, okay, never mind. Now we get it.
First page, line 29. Should that be 1813?
Yes.
Yeah. Oops.
Okay, anything else? Hearing none, all those in favor of the minutes as amended, I assume, second and motion will assume, we'll make that change even though it's technical, doesn't change content. Now, I assume silence means assent.
All set.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, those abstaining.
Abstain.
Okay, Joe McCaffrey is abstaining, I'm assuming due to absence. Okay. So, 501. And for the record, voting designation is all members present. Okay. We have, I think it was passed out, the James's comments on case 1810 compliance.
Yes. Okay, these didn't come out earlier, or did I just miss the email today?
I emailed them today.
Oh, okay, because I didn't check emails this evening. So,
When we
okay.
take a couple minutes to read over this,
Yeah.
just to double check.
Susan also made copies.
You made lots of copies.
There are copies for everybody.
Good.
Did you have a copy? Can I get one of those?
You need one more? Okay. Joe has a couple.
No, we're good.
if I'm reading this right, we just added conditions 6 and 7.
We
Or it made a change
moved.
to, yeah. Made a change to 2.
Correct. We moved old number 2 and replaced it with new number 2.
Right.
And then since we are accepting a letter instead of a permit, we still want to get that permit at some point. So we added that as a new number 6. And then we added new number 7. DOT was a little bit concerned about their ability to enforce removal of that driveway if their permit was already out the door, and they did not. The whole point of this was that they didn't want to see 4 curb cuts where there are currently 3. They were fine with 3 staying 3 and becoming a different 3, but they certainly don't want there to be a new curb cut going in. So the suggestion was that if we can make sure that that was added to our conditions of approval, we would also have the ability to enforce and help them enforce.
And technically, because this is a public hearing, I should open it before we
should.
discuss it. So I'll reopen?
This is a compliance hearing, so just
Compliance
open.
hearing, okay. Compliance hearing for case 18-10, Jennifer and Matthew Fry of Northwood for compliance of conditions. Okay. Voting designation, all members present. Okay, now we can legally talk about it.
Well, just for my edification, why have we not run into this before? 'Cause
So-
certainly we've issued permits, we've had conditions to get the permit, and it's been on the state highway. What's different about this
So
situation?
typically, we have been requiring a driveway permit as a condition precedent, meaning before we can sign the plans. And the idea behind that is, whether it's a state permit or a Northwood permit, if we're doing a subdivision or if we're doing a site plan, the board has the expertise more or less to decide, is this a buildable parcel, or is the on-site development what it should be. But we want to make sure that they also have to get the technical review by either the road agent or DOT's engineers to finalize, yes, this is a safe parcel with safe access to it. In this case, we ran into the issue because of the subdivision amendment that we had put an easement in place in a prior subdivision that wasn't finalized, wasn't finally recorded. Or no, that one has been recorded by now. Sorry. Scott does so much stuff from it with us. I'm confusing. So that was recorded, that was finalized, and we were undoing some of the provisions related to the driveway on that one. So where normally we can count on at least getting a, yes, we intend to issue the permit and everything's fine and go ahead. In this case, in removing that easement, DOT wanted this plan to be recorded with the registrar before they issue that permit.
Okay, so-
And we can't record the plan until we have final approval, and we can't get final approval the way we normally do things until we have the permit.
Okay, so in this case, it was the state asking for something different.
Right.
I'm just wondering if we need to
Chicken and egg
amend.
situation,
Yeah.
Right, so we needed to figure out, we can't record until we have the permit, they don't want to give the permit until it's recorded.
Yeah.
How can we change this to get it done?
As far as happening before, this has not happened before.
Yeah, but it's because the state changed their approach on this one.
Mhm.
That's what I wanted to understand. Okay.
Well, because one driveway's being eliminated and they don't want to have that one left and possibly kept open.
And
Yeah, I can
if
see the
we,
reason. I
if we
understand.
didn't have that easement in place on a prior approval that needed to be vacated, I think if it was just, hey, a prior one showed a driveway over here and a permit wasn't issued for it, and they're saying we want to move that driveway to over here, that wouldn't have been an issue. But the fact that there was an easement in place that allowed for access across the property on a driveway that already had a curb cut, they wanted to make sure they had some extra teeth to make sure that that was closed and removed.
No, it makes sense.
So my thought process, since it's shown as being loaned and seeded, was to give a year to get that done, because I think if you loaned and seeded right now, it probably wouldn't turn out very well. So give it a spring and a summer, and they can do it whenever makes the most sense for them.
So what do we need to do, Bob? Make a motion to accept the revised plan here, or revised sequence of events?
Yes.
I'll make that
Reverend,
motion.
would you just ask if there's any
Or
others,
it's still-
Yeah.
just in case
We're still.
this is
Since this is a public hearing, if there are any members of the public, specifically abutters, who are present, would like, and no one has responded,
Thank you.
At the last meeting, Mike came down, so.
yes, he did, true. Well, I said this time specifically abutters, we
Oh,
could open it for public comment, but since we have three members of the public here, but maybe we'll, before somebody makes a motion, let me know.
I move that we
Oh,
accept.
hang
He's
on.
going to do it anyway.
You're gonna do it
He's
anyway.
done.
Oh,
So,
sorry.
okay, we're done discussing.
Oh,
For any of the three members of the public who are here, I'll open public comment. If you would like to speak, let me know. Hearing none, I'll close public comment. Go ahead.
why are you looking at me, Bob? Okay,
Be cut off again.
so I'll make a motion to approve, well, let's see, amend this approval to the way James has written it, specifically numbers 1 through 7.
Second.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Kreider, second by Mr. McCaffrey. Usually it doesn't work that way. Usually you're swapped. Discussion? Hearing none.
We discussed it a lot.
Yeah, we have discussed, well, we have discussed it. Further discussion, sorry. Any comments from?
No?
Okay. Figured you'd speak up beforehand, but just wanted to double check. Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, those abstaining. Okay.
So as far as staff is concerned, the prior to signing of plans conditions have been met, so as soon as we get those copies,
Those were turned in.
then we're good to sign.
Okay. Is that what these
No,
are?
I think
No.
it's that one.
This one? Okay.
One of them.
Okay.
You worked so hard tonight.
Yeah, really.
Almost
Say.
happy?
Let's just move along.
Butter to be passed out?
What is that?
I don't know.
Oh, that was
DOT?
the DOT letter.
Yes? Is that,
Oh, done.
okay.
That was part of that.
It was just more paper I used.
Okay.
That was
We got it
their
in the
letter
email.
regarding this case.
Yeah, in the email.
Did you
Yeah.
hear that tree of the forest drop?
I saw it, and I couldn't tie it to that case. Anyway, I'll take a copy if you want to take it. This is what we just did. So just for your own edification, if you want to read it.
Makes me feel a little bit better.
Yes.
A long letter.
Well, a lot of,
Use it back for scrap paper.
Yeah, it's got all
Yeah.
the pictures and stuff on it.
Recycle, whatever.
yep. Good tinder for,
Ooh,
Wood
good
fire.
point.
it's what I do
Very
with almost all,
useful.
at this time of
Very
year, this is
useful.
what I do with almost all my planning board stuff.
Oh, that's on the
After it's
record,
approved.
Bob, all of it.
I know, after it's approved, it goes in the wood stove.
After you color on one side, to use both sides. Yeah.
After you
Save
use
a
it
tree.
for note paper.
I'm an IT director. I try to use as little paper as possible.
There you go.
Okay?
Paper already exists, though. You're not using it here.
Tree's
Okay.
already cut at this
So-
point, Bob.
Yeah.
I'll digress briefly because we don't have much on the agenda. One of my absolute least favorite tasks is unjamming printers where someone has run recycled paper through that has staples in it. So, yes, I am a tree hugger in some respects, but you don't reprint staple paper.
Yeah, but isn't like 12 years of planning board papers enough to insulate your house?
Not if they're added to the carbon load in the
Do you
atmosphere.
think those trees, those staples were in the trees originally?
No. Okay.
I've got
Or
some
we
trees that
digress.
have staples in them.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are we ready to talk about zoning
Go
amendments?
right ahead.
Did everybody, you should all have received 2 sections of code in the mail, one from Concord on their buffers to bluff ordinance. And after trying to say that several times today, I've just progressed to bluffers. And another Article 7 from Dover's code on their conservation district. I pulled both of these as examples for steep slope protection, since we've sort of been trying to figure out how we can change Northwood's steep slope conservation district. What I've just passed out is model language from the innovative land use controls that was done in, is it on here? It's not. I think 2009-ish. So to sort of recap some of the issues that we've been having with this ordinance, or this section of Northwood's ordinance, part of it is related to the definition of a structure that we are fixing. But then we have the issue of the buffer area, or the less intense slope area, disallowing essentially any impacts, be they construction of a road or driveway, construction of a structure. From the way I was reading the ordinance most recently, just landscaping, changing the lay of the land to impact those slopes. All of it is pretty much forbidden. And then we have the stricter, more intense slopes that just say you can't build a road or a structure. So that has led us to some issues of driveways, but it's also led us to some issues that if we were to implement a simple fix where we were changing the word construction, because a structure is anything that's constructed, so construction would lead to a structure. If we are changing that to also forbid driveways that are not structures, the easy ways to do that would be to use words like disturbance instead. And if we were doing that, you would not be able to touch in any way a 25% or greater slope in any amount, regardless of how big that area of slope is. So there are a few different ways that we could approach that. Dover's ordinance, if you look on page 170-83, which is the second page, under B for location, number 4. It says those areas of slopes in excess of 20%.
I'm sorry, just repeat that one more time. Where you-
So on the second page
Yep.
of the Dover Code,
I think that was
Five?
a while ago.
yeah, this was mailed out with your
Email.
packets.
That's not
It's in
some,
the email, I didn't bring it along.
Did you say V or 5, is that what you
No,
said?
no, it's
It's not here.
in a separate document,
Separate document.
email.
You may be
get-
the only one that has.
Am I the only one that has a
Let
copy?
me run
think
some
so.
copies.
Yeah, run
Okay.
some copies, because I left mine on my computer.
Run both of
You,
those then.
you handed out stuff
I,
before you left on the conference.
those two, I emailed
Yes.
Yes,
to everybody
yes.
and asked Linda if it would be possible to get them in the packets to be mailed.
I think they were, but they were a while ago, right?
No,
I don't mail packets to the planning board.
I didn't
I don't
get it
remember
back
getting
in.
that.
Yeah, I didn't get a packet in the mail.
put it
I
in
remember
the
getting James'
blue
email.
folders.
I have the
We'll take
email
care
right
of it
here.
anyway.
Yeah.
All right, we'll run some some copies,
Comments on
and
But
so essentially the three samples that I have for you tonight are taking three different approaches to the idea of how do we regulate bad impacts to slopes that are going to result in landslides and erosion and a bunch of bad stuff without getting into so many nitpicky details that you can't impact a 100 square foot area of a steep slope that otherwise you can just take a backhoe and completely remove that slope and it's no longer a problem. So Dover's has taken the approach of setting a minimum area that needs to be contiguous sloped areas before it counts as something that can be impacted. The model language from the innovative land use controls takes the approach of measuring the amount of disturbance, and then the Concord ordinance takes the approach of applying a new definition to slopey areas, that they have a defined term of a bluff. If something meets the definition of a bluff, it's so big, got so many feet of elevation change within it, then that is what cannot be impacted or requires a conditional use permit to be impacted. Other areas of slope, they are completely agnostic on. So I guess we can start with the handout you do all have in front of you. That this is a pretty short section of code. The handy dandy bit about the innovative land use control standards is that these have all been peer reviewed already. I think regional planning commissions were the ones heading this up, so the people that were drafting these were handing it back and forth between a project team. They were then sent to a different team for editorial review. They were then sent to NHMA for legal review. So if we implement this language, it's safe language. The only thing that was cut off is section 7 costs. I didn't want to waste a second sheet of paper for 3 lines. All that section says is that any costs for review are passed on to the applicant. So in this case, they've taken the approach of providing additional performance standards, and then a separate section about the administration of conditional use permits. One thing I mentioned in my email, a conditional use permit and a special exception are functionally identical. The only difference is a special exception requires you to go to the ZBA. A conditional use permit is done by the planning board. So it's a different board doing exactly the same review. We can cut and paste performance criteria back and forth. It's just a matter of who's doing the review. So Hal mentioned he thought it was worth discussing whether relief to items like this should be a conditional use permit or a special exception. Whether they should require a completely separate application and process that needs to be done before the planning board can see a case, or whether we should do things as a conditional use permit where there may be an extra application, so there's an extra vote that needs to be taken, but it's the planning board that's doing it and they can happen the same night as site review or subdivision approval, and simplify the process.
Yeah, I've heard some good things in terms of how the planning board has progressed. But I've also heard comments from people saying they don't like the idea that you got to go from one to another and then back, and you get sort of jumbled. I mean, the zoning board does, and the zoning appeals do have I think a right place, but on things that where I think we're more knowledgeable, have the plans in front of us, are discussing it in far more detail. I just thought, to me, it made more sense that some of this be pulled into the planning board or be part of the planning board process. I think what James said, maybe a separate form or separate set of details, so it's clear what we're thinking about, what we're deciding on, so that if somebody does decide to challenge that aspect of it, it is separate. But especially when we talk about some of these things where we might just be talking about a small disturbance and stuff, to make the people go through other meetings, maybe wait another month in the cycle because of the nature of the way the meetings are timed or scheduled. I don't think we lose any control, and I think we're just as knowledgeable in certain aspects of this, if not more knowledgeable, and therefore can make a better consideration for the town. So anyway, I would like to see us move in that direction if the others feel that.
So conditional use is your preference, you're saying so?
Yes.
Really structured around conditional use.
I think I agree with Hal in that
At the same time.
for certain minor aspects of design, like steep slopes, I can't think of another one that,
The other one we require a special exception for is wetland impacts.
right, that's the only other one I could think of. And that's bigger. I'm not sure if I want to try to tackle that, but on steep slopes, I'm okay. I think the notice aspect is what I find valuable for requiring a separate application, because it's probably going out to the same people, but it might attract a little more attention to the fact of what they're doing, and especially Conservation Commission as well.
Well, I think about, in particular, the gentleman that's putting in his machine shop. Excuse me, the people before that,
The subdivision?
the subdivision, where we had a discussion about the driveways and we were looking at the lot lines and different things. I mean, to try to cycle that back and forth between two boards, I think, it just wouldn't have made sense to me. I mean, in this case, they were willing to adjust the lot lines, but what if there was other considerations that maybe there's some more finesse that was needed or something? I just think that would be very cumbersome for both boards to be involved and make it harder on the applicant with no better result for the town. So, anyway, that's my opinion.
Or I'd want to be careful. Well, now we have our copies of them.
Yes.
Let's
Yes.
look at the other parts before we go too
Yeah.
far down one path.
So to circle back to the Dover one on the second page,
Which is the P70 or 17082 that you
yes,
just, or the 170-25.
yeah, on the alternating pages, they say Dover code at the top, and it's helpful.
Oh, yeah, I see.
So in the middle of page 170-83, they have their definition, and I've never seen a conservation district like this anywhere outside of Dover, where they mash the wetlands and the slopes and all of that into one district. So I would not advocate for doing this that way.
Say that again?
So this is Dover's conservation district, and it includes wetlands, and it includes slopes, and it includes floodplain
All as one.
as one conservation overlay.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm not recommending that aspect, but what I wanted to bring it for was so that you could see another example of how they set that minimum threshold for the slopes, and then also how they had the conditional use conditions laid out. I think we have, and this overlay isn't as bad as the wetland overlay about conflating uses and structures, but we do have some conflated mushiness between, are you permitting a use, are you permitting a structure, are you permitting both of those? And I think in general it would help us to have these be a little bit more straightforward and explicit. The one thing that we run into some issues on, so immediately below that, below that definition, they go into the conditional use permits. They talk about the criteria for streets, roads, and access ways for making use of the property. They go into a separate set of criteria that you need for a special or a conditional use permit to permit structures, and then dredging, filling, draining, etc. Item C under that shows where they require state and federal permits. That is a condition that we might run into some issues if we were doing a special exception and not a conditional use permit. Where, because those would be separate processes, we've run into some issues at the zoning board of them not being sure what is their purview and what is planning board purview. Where they're asking for more information about, well, how exactly are the units going to be laid out, where exactly are the driveways going to be. That's something we're going to talk about in subdivision, and that's a planning board decision. And we aren't expecting that somebody is going to have all of those permits in place before they've even come to the planning board. So that would be a much handier condition to have if we were running the processes simultaneously as a conditional use permit.
Just quick, I won't even call it an aside, but on the definition of steep slopes, so page 17083, the item number 4, how is the 2,000 square foot defined? Is that, if I'm looking at it from a plan view, you know, that could be a 40 by 50 foot area, but am I looking at 2,000 square feet of bluff face or surface cliff face?
I think we would probably look at it in terms of plan area. That's a good point, and it's a...
I mean,
You know,
if I was looking at
Sure, it's a weakness in here, whether you're discussing plan area or surface area.
right,
And that's a way that if we wanted to go with that as sort of a definition and a qualifying factor, that we could probably improve that.
I mean, the easy way for me to think of that is looking at a GIS, and I've got an oblong, and I click on it and see what the area is. And I would assume that that is mapped or translated topographic area, surface area, which would actually mean less impact
Yeah,
in terms of once it's mapped. But
I think the struggle is you start interchanging some of those concepts.
Yeah.
I think it's very difficult for the applicant, and I think us too. I think, you know, the plan, I mean, most people think of it, everything as plan view.
right, but in most of our area, that's fine. But in this case, if you're looking at a greater than 25% slope,
Yeah, it's a little bit
we
more.
set it as 2,000 square feet as our minimum impact. If I've got, for argument's sake, I'm trying to do an analogy here. If this is 2,000 square feet of surface area, but we do plan area at 25% slope, I'm looking at
Andy,
a trig
yes.
function of that, and it's much less.
Right, so just figure.
Well, are you, but, okay, this, so you're saying here the discrepancy is that that's not defined, what they
Right.
mean.
Right, we would want to define one or the other, because, you know, the steeper your slope, technically, you know, you have a vertical slope, you have no impact.
Wouldn't, yeah,
You have no plan area to show.
We can always adjust the
Yeah.
area that we worry about.
Exactly, I'm just bringing it up for consideration, or for thinking about.
well,
We're
I
still
mean,
there.
as I see that, Bob, I mean, the likelihood is it's measured square feet, regardless if it was like this, you measured the square feet.
Right,
Even if it was vertical, which would be zero plan view,
exactly.
because you're looking at the edge, but I think they're measuring just the square footage of the dimensioned area, because they're talking contiguous, so.
Mhm.
But, yeah, that's something, it could be made clearer, I suppose, because obviously, as we sit looking at a plan, actually, as it comes out on the plan, it's gonna be the square feet.
Oh, yeah, I mean, everything's gonna be square feet,
I mean,
but it's a matter of,
yeah, no, I'm following what
you
you
know,
mean,
where,
but
So this is 2,000 square feet would be, what, 10 by 20?
50 by 50, 45 by
40
40.
by 50.
well, no, you just said.
Yeah. So,
About the size of
The size of this.
an impact area, a good-sized house.
About this size right here.
Yeah. a little bit bigger than one of my classrooms. But, yeah.
So if we're shifting it to surface area, which I think is going to be considerably harder for the applicant to calculate.
Right.
But if it's just surface area and it's something that's ending in a pretty compact cliff, that would theoretically be an easier, more compact area to excavate and re-landscape than a larger, flatter plan area.
Yes.
Because you'd be able to just take the top of that hill off, flatten it out.
This to that.
Yeah.
Well, they're calling an area, okay, that's a good perspective to look at this room, it's maybe a little more than, oh, maybe it is. So, say take this floor area of this room, so this is called a conservation district according to this. It qualifies, yeah, conservation district, determined to consist of the following. So these, with slopes 20% within an area like this, but let's say our lot size here typically is 2 acres or better. Unless it's grandfathered or something, so, is that going to, that's saying that's a conservation area, that little area within the 2 acres, which is very small within a 2 acre lot, this is.
I think you have it flipped. If it's less than 2,000 square feet, it's ignored.
It's not a conservation, yeah. It says they're having 2,000 or more, right? And
Right.
even contiguous, which means that actually it could be an odd, it doesn't have to be this rectangle, it could be something odd. But if it were this, I'm just using that as your example there. So the conservation district is this little piece within the 2 acres, right?
Mhm.
Or
Yes.
it's not saying the whole 2 acres becomes a conservation
Correct,
district.
correct.
So in that regard, it's the same as our overlay, that only the portions that are identified as having the steep slopes on them are considered part of the overlay.
Yeah, I'm only observing here, this is a peculiar, you just picture 2 acres, which is 440, we're talking 2,000 versus 80,000 plus square feet. So it's a very small little piece within the 2 acres.
It's only 5%.
Yeah, but I'm just picturing, so this is now determining, somebody wants to build a house. This says they can't build a house on this until they get special exception or they could build it anywhere else within the 2 acres, assuming everything else is okay.
Right.
Right.
If they want to build it back into the steep hill, I mean, just as an example, Joe, when you drive down 107, there's a house off on the right, a red house, where they did just this. They cut into about a 30% slope, and I can just imagine the rainwater coming down through there and stuff, and I wonder how they got it approved.
Well, I'm just, okay, but I'm only saying that's a bigger situation. I'm not, actually, see, I have to say as a perspective, I'm not necessarily opposed to, which isn't the way the ordinance is going, but somebody building on a steep slope. Otherwise, you'd have a lot of problems in California, Colorado, and et cetera, Hawaii, or pick a place. There are people, it's a matter, so, but you can build on steep slopes very successfully and not cause any damage to the terrain. It's just how you build. It's not the act of building, it's the way you go about it. And millions of
Some
people
pretty
have
good
proven this.
mudslides out there.
Yeah, I
So
think
if
I
we're
would
gonna-
disagree with that. I think the act of building does cause weaknesses.
Well,
But
briefly.
I think what these other ordinances are trying to do is figure out, is this a big enough slope that it's actually going to cause those problems?
Well, even, no, but I'm saying, James, you could have, I mean, just take a look at any, if you haven't been to any, I mean, because I have, many, many places in the country where there are extremely steep slopes, and it depends on the terrain. The building process might have been disturbing, but very often, because they appreciate where they are as much as anybody else or more, they, you know, they repair whatever they've done. When it's done, you can't even tell, except that now there's a house there. And they're just merely taking advantage of something they consider, you know, a beautiful view. We have some nice views around here, but we're not, you know, not a lot of steep, but Saddleback or a few places where you could get steep slope. And a lot of it is, for instance, in ledge areas where you're not even disturbing vegetation necessarily, because there isn't any. But if you were to, like you were referring to, I think I might know the place you're talking about, if you just cut into a slope and you really haven't done anything to build it properly, then it becomes a big erosion problem forever. Because it isn't a piece of ledge they cut into you know, sand and shale and clay and all kinds of stuff, and then it washes away.
Are you arguing to eliminate everything?
No, I'm just saying that, just picture though that this is a very small parcel. Dover doesn't have, I don't think they have a 2-acre lot requirement anyway.
It depends on the zoning district.
What?
It depends on the zoning district. The urban districts are very
certainly
small.
in many, you know, just lots of it there isn't any. So we have one. So
we
that's an odd. I'm just saying this may not be the best. That particular paragraph there may not be the best model for us anyway. But that's to introduce 2,000 square feet as the concern in a 2-acre lot.
Well, we have to define it some way. Otherwise, it remains as it is in our current, which is any steep slope. I mean, this is why we're discussing this. So what we're saying is, if anywhere within this room there's a steep slope and you want to do something here, you got to go get a special exemption.
So if you, right now, if you have a 10-foot wide slope along the road that's at a 30% grade, the way that I would interpret the ordinance right now, you can't touch it. You can't get in.
Okay, you pointed out something before that if again we were using this as the example, they get easily modified within a 2-acre lot. This is a very easily modified condition, whatever it is, slope-wise. So I'm pointing out that that we keep perspective about where it leads.
We're trying to lead it to where we're making it a little bit easier for the landowner to do something when there's a minimal impact to any of their neighbors, if any impact.
Right.
The way it is now, they're screwed. This would, I think, mitigate.
And that's the problem of a blanket.
Technical term.
That's the problem.
Okay, they're not screwed. They got to go for a variance, and they got to go through the loop again. And
Special exception, which is not difficult.
But that's the trouble with a blanket prescription.
That's what we have,
Yeah, I know.
and that's why we're
I
trying
know,
to
but I'm just
adjust.
saying, yeah, I'm not fond of that either, but, and I think it should be modified. I mean, somebody can cut into a steep slope and do something, and if they've taken into account erosion and so forth, or even build retaining walls, we have a situation right over here behind the Shell station where that's a consideration, and they are doing...
That's engineering as opposed to
Yeah,
land
but
use.
that's the way you take care of,
I'm not disagreeing with you, but
and they are.
the triggers for proper engineering are the zoning code.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the Concord one.
So this one, the definition of a bluff is on the last page. And in this case, they're actually going in and discussing the type of soil materials, with the idea being if you want to prevent erosion and you want to prevent landslide, regulate the steep slopes that have soils that are likely to erode or result in landslides.
You're on the very last, no.
Yep. So it goes on to be very specific in their case about it's got to be near the river, near the flood hazard district. They've got a lot of things that are sort of in relation with each other. But then it's also talking about the slope and vertical change. See, bluff lines. 1 foot vertically for each 6 feet horizontally, so that's the slope. And another line referred as the top of the bluff or the slope of the banking. Yeah, so they're setting this as
From here to here.
a vertical between qualifying slopes. So it's a lot.
1 and 6 doesn't count as the bluff, and 1 and 3 counts as the bluff.
Right. So whether or not we wanted to go as far as defining a bluff and doing a bluff ordinance, I also thought it was a useful example because of the conditions for their conditional use permit, many of which I think would be applicable whether we used a bluff definition or not. We could still think about their conditions as being something to draw on for a rehashed conditional use permit on a slopes ordinance.
So, James, at what point does a bluff become a cliff?
That's an excellent question. I don't think they have cliff as a defined term. So I think they would just consider everything to be a bluff
Okay.
or a bluffier bluff.
Yes. Where the slope of the banking equals or exceeds 1 foot vertical for every 6 feet horizontal.
So they just ignore cliffs and just call it a bluff.
It's everything is a bluff, even if it's vertical, up to a point being vertical.
Okay,
So.
very bluffy.
But actually, it's quite interesting because if you look at the typical topology of the Northeast to begin with, because it's such verticals are very eroded, we have essentially the old scree at the base of the cliff, very steep sides, but then it curves in angles to the summit as opposed to the north or the west where it's sharp the whole way up.
Yeah, I was
So
just
that
gonna
you're
ask.
essentially restricting the sides and not the top.
We don't need anything for a butte either?
No.
We don't have
We
too
don't
many
have buttes.
buttes here.
They also use the defined term ravine that I did not pull for you.
Thank goodness, the discussion would go on forever.
And they discuss what happens if a bluff ends in a ravine. So I think the most useful thing out of this would be they have a nice, simple, on the second page, number 2, items A through E. This is what you provide to get a conditional use permit. And I think it's pretty straightforward. It's flexible enough to say, provide these things if they're applicable. Don't provide these if they're not. You have to show that the stormwater stuff is going to be directed away from the sensitive area. And if you can show that simply, more power to you. If it's a complicated thing that you need to do a full stormwater plan for, then you do a full stormwater plan. The proposed disturbance isn't going to destabilize it. If it's something that barely qualifies and you're showing, hey, we're just nicking this little corner, maybe there's some discretion to say, yeah, we can see that that's not going to destabilize it. But if it's we're cutting into this 24% slope and we're taking half of this thing at the base of a big hill out, we're going to need to show you some engineering that we've got structural supports that this isn't going to cave in on itself.
So, James, to that point about those technical discussions there, is that something you would envision that we would have to get engineering expertise to confirm?
I think that would be something that once an application came in, I would say it's the discretion of the board to decide whether you have enough information for that.
Yeah, 'cause
And if you don't, if you think this is more complicated than I'm familiar with, I think you should do more work that can be reviewed by our engineer. That would be where that cost section that we discussed at the end of the model from the state comes in, that those costs are going to be borne by the applicant to send this off for peer review.
Well, I only think about that in terms of, like as you start excavating away or something, I don't know what the different soil types are and how quickly that would cause an erosion problem versus just being stable and stuff. And I think,
That's why we have engineers.
yeah, we'd have to get some kind of expertise on that, I would think.
It also depends on what the surface cover is, and
Right, I think you might,
when they do it the time of year, and what the vegetation is on the surface, and a whole bunch of other
right, which,
stuff. So
so James, you would say you would not use this,
I probably
A bluff.
wouldn't use a whole bluff ordinance. But
would
I
just
think
use
that
this-
an adaptation of those
condition.
5 conditions,
Yeah.
for whether it's a conditional use permit or a special exception, are a pretty simple, straightforward set of conditions.
Yeah,
I think the better way for us to go is probably to stick with a steep slope overlay, but to do something either like what Dover's doing by identifying a minimum area of this slope for it to qualify as a steep slope, or the minimum, or what the other example is doing, under delineation.
where's that, James?
So on this model, delineation is Roman 2 on the first page, where it's saying this applies to all areas with a slope of greater than 15%. I'm not sure that I would go to the extent of getting a steep slopes map, because that would be GIS analysis that may or may not accurately reflect what's happening on site. But it requires a minimum area of disturbance then for this one,
So,
in this case being 20,000 or greater.
I was a little bit confused by this, because there's 2,000 and there's 20,000.
Right.
This is total disturbed area, I think.
was going to be my question. I would make the assumption exactly that the disturbance for the entire application is 20,000 square feet. If it's less than that, then you really don't
Yeah,
have to
I'm
worry
not sure
about
who originally drafted this and what they were intending. I'm also not aware, I don't know what communities may or may not have adopted this language explicitly, but my interpretation would be the total disturbance on site of 20,000.
I have to say, I'm more in favor of the Dover one, where they just say, below 2,000 square feet.
Right.
You don't have to
Conditional
worry about,
use.
because all this disturbed area thing, it gets very touchy, whether you're driving in, you're maneuvering to do something, and how much is really disturbed and stuff. Whereas the 2,000
Well,
square feet, we can measure.
Well, you can measure all disturbed area. when you define disturbance, what constitutes disturbance, and you measure the area.
Is disturbance meant to include
Yeah,
temporary as well as
Yes.
permanent?
yeah, yeah, that's why I think that's a tough.
So landscaping and site work where you're disturbing it and putting it back counts as a disturbance, but it's not a permanent impact.
That's why I sort of lean more towards, let's just worry about areas that we can measure and then, because there is other things about disturbances and stuff in our ordinances. So, you know, just, I mean, that's just,
And we need to have this drafted by the end of the month? Or
Yeah, I would say that we should at least have a draft that we are tweaking at the next meeting.
Because we want to have final language for December. Yeah, just double check. I will, speaking for myself, not as chair, there are parts of all of these that I like.
yeah, yeah. Well, why don't you just list off which ones you like and let's just see how well that matches up with other folks.
Okay? Working off the model language and guidance.
Yeah,
You know, the purpose is good, the delineation, I think we just need to tweak the numbers. I would definitely don't want the steep slopes map included in that.
okay.
Yeah, you're saying you're not.
Correct.
As James was saying.
I mean, they're all going to be similar. I mean, the definitions we have to include somehow. It's just a choice. I think Dover defines it one way, the model ordinance defines it another.
Bob,
the-
I guess if you're saying that, I would just stop right at, this ordinance applies to all areas with a slope greater than 15%, period. Because that, also the disturbed,
Yeah, we could. I don't want to come up with language
Oh,
tonight,
okay.
because I still got to think about how I want to put it together.
I think what I would suggest is if I can get feedback on which parts of these you like,
That's what I was trying
I
to do.
will put something together for you to react to at the next meeting.
well, I definitely like where the planning board would
Conditional use permit.
conditionally use, and I personally like the idea about setting a size, area of slope that it has to be greater than before we start worrying about it. So like that 2,000 feet that Dover has in there,
I would,
it's less than 2,000 feet, which
I
is
would
going to,
clarify your statement in that it's not that we don't worry about it, it means that it gets impacted through a conditional use permit.
If it's greater
above-
than-
If it's,
if it's bigger than 2,000 square feet.
no, if it's,
No, the way
It's
Dover
less
does
than-
it for things that are smaller than 2,000 square feet, those aren't considered
They aren't
steep slopes that are part of the overlay.
yes.
So those you're allowed to impact normally, you don't need special permission because it's a small enough area
Yeah.
Exactly.
that it should be fine.
Are we on the same wavelength then, Bob?
Yes,
Okay.
I think so.
So those are the two main things for me, and then otherwise, this model looked pretty good.
Aside, well, and then what,
No, the model, what'd you call this one?
yeah, that's the model.
Yeah,
Model
that's the
language.
model out of the innovative land use control.
Right.
And then I think the only thing you have to add is then from Concord, the documentation part. That, on page 2 of 2, item
Well, for
number 2.
the terms for the,
terms.
James, where's the definition of a bluff? Where's it show for?
That is the third page of the
The
Concord
last
ordinance.
page of the Concord one.
Oh, it's over
the
there.
glossary.
They had it in their glossary, so I went and
I thought it, yeah.
copied it
Yep.
separately.
But I did like the Concord list there of documentation. I thought that was pretty good.
So, in a, along these lines of taking what's been discussed, we have let's call it a maximum size of no impact, for argument's sake, for now, 2,000 square feet. If it's less, if you have an area of steep slopes greater than 25% or whatever the number is, if it's less than 2,000 square feet, we don't deal with it. If it's greater than 2,000 square feet that you want to impact, we
Yeah.
then have a conditional use permit.
The 2,000 square feet is a measure of the sloped area to determine whether it's in the overlay.
Yes.
Yes.
So if you impact 1 foot of a 2,000 or greater, that needs a conditional use permit.
Okay. Just making sure we're all on the same
If
language.
you impact all of a 1,999 square foot sloped area, that needs nothing.
Yeah, we have to
If we
set
do
it
it
someplace. I
covered.
mean,
Yeah, you have to set
it
exact-
sounds,
you have to
I mean, it
set
sounds
some
funny
trigger.
when you say it that way, but you have to set some limits at some point, because otherwise you could basically
Right now, we don't have any limits.
draw the line around and avoid everything. So yeah, so in some cases, you're gonna only impact a small area, but you're impacting it, so sorry. But that's part of why I think this conditional use approval is more important to stay within us, because we're the ones that are gonna be discussing it the most, and we should be able to figure it out.
Oh, that is a good point, that you just,
I mean, I would feel more uncomfortable about what James said if we didn't keep it internal to the planning board.
I don't want to say what the ZBA is or isn't doing, but I don't think typically they look at a lot of the same documents we do. And the site, well, the
Pretty good
plans,
in some of the,
well, they
some
may
of the
look at
cases,
some
but
of it, but, yeah.
yeah.
My impression is we go for a lot more stuff.
Yeah.
In the aggregate of just considering something, so,
So,
but I like the consistency part.
in a case where, again, for argument's sake, we pick 2,000 square feet, the applicant is required to meet all the other zoning requirements and site plan and all the other fun stuff. But we don't actually, there is no special call out for, like, the article on the number 2, A through E, like Concord has, for conditional use permit, if it's not in the overlay zone or it's not impacted by that. You have to meet everything else, but
Right. So if it's under
if it's
the
under the minimum
threshold,
size,
they don't have to show it as part of the overlay
right.
because it's small. We would consider it to be de
You're
minimis.
seeing the overlay,
Yeah.
their plan that they're applying to us with.
So
And we
they
have-
would still have to show us the 2-foot contours, and I'm sure
it
we'd be able to pull out an engineer scale and say,
It
hey,
shows
this little area looks like it has a pretty steep slope on it right now. But they wouldn't have to shade it and identify it as part of the steep slope overlay. Right now, just anything that shows up in their CAD programs as a 20% slope or greater, they've got to shade as part of the overlay.
To comply with the overlay. I mean, only the distinction I'm making here, I guess, is that we have overlay charts
Yeah.
that for agricultural, soils.
The wetland overlay and the steep slope overlay don't have maps that define them. They're defined by the on-site assessment of the surveyor or the wetland scientist that says, this is a wetland, this is where the wetland is. Anything that I have identified as a wetland is part of the overlay. I have surveyed and done the contours, and these are the areas that are greater than 20% slope, and any place that I have identified as a greater than 20% slope is part of the overlay.
Okay, I'm just hanging up on this, the term with the overlay but that's,
That's our definition.
what comes under what we would designate as, for a given overlay, those are the characteristics that would fall into that. I'm just saying, we
We
don't,
would change that definition to exclude areas that were under 2,000 square feet of, or whatever the number is, of contiguous steep sloped area. They would not be part of the overlay zone.
okay, when you're saying, that's all I'm doing, is just trying to figure, when you're using the term "the overlay." I mean, that's an overlay, or at least some of those over there are overlays.
Sure.
And there's, but we're not talking about that per se, we're talking about something,
No, we're talking the same thing.
no, because
Because
as James has said, that when the site plan is submitted to us, there may not be any reference to it on one of these.
So the
It's going to be the current survey that's going to be shown.
Right, so the idea of the overlay district, that there are, by being in the area that's part of the overlay, there are other rules you have to follow, that idea is the same. The only difference is we're not using a reference map to determine if it falls in the overlay. We're using information from the applicant surveyor or wetland
I
scientist.
guess all I'm doing is, and see, the term to me, I'm taking it literally. Overlay is just that, it's an overlay. So you're, it's a topographical.
It's a map that shows.
Yeah, but we don't
areas
have
to
that
find.
until somebody shows up with this survey.
Exactly.
There's no overlay here except what they're providing at that point.
Mr.
That's-
Chairman,
okay.
may I ask a
Fine.
question?
Sure.
Two things come to my mind. One is you will also be seeing residential applications, which is something this board doesn't typically do. There's a possibility of a residential permit for a house that would come under this. Just so you're aware, it's not just going to be in the typical fashion of a subdivision.
Anytime somebody wants to modify a steep slope of whatever
Just as
the
a
area,
thought,
whatever
when
the
you're
definition.
So we're only
deciding to
considering
go
this?
No.
to the zoning board or to the planning board, you're going to be adding some workload there that you don't typically have. But the other question I had was process for a conditional use permit. We haven't been dealing with that. Would that be similar to a planning board application where they come in, whether it's for a building permit or a subdivision, and then they have to file, we'd have to create new applications for that?
Yeah, I think we would put together an application form. They would file that simultaneous with their site plan or subdivision if they were coming in with one of those. If it was somebody that was already on a subdivided lot and they needed it to get a building permit, they would just file the conditional use permit.
Now, if they didn't know prematurely, or if they didn't know that could occur at the point where they're discussing it before us, right, where then that application could be made
Well,
as part of the final,
Well, it's
the
similar
eventual.
now, it's just that the parameters are different, that's all. Somebody comes in now and wants to build in a steep slope,
They have to get
The-
a special exception
the
form.
building inspector would be looking at their application and it would say, well, I guess you need to fill out an application for a special exception.
An
Or
example
now they'll be directed over to the planning board.
would, and I'm just brainstorming at this point in time, and don't groan when I say this. Oh, gee, I just asked you not to.
sorry.
Would there be, aside from sowing confusion, would there be any difference if we said instead of a conditional use, or conditional use permits are only for commercial or non-residential applications? Residential applications are zoning board special exceptions.
That'd be,
Like I said,
maybe it could be done.
that's why I condition.
No, Bob, I think that if you're trying to eliminate the problem that Linda talked about, maybe you just say, we are only able to do conditional use on the plans in front of us. And if something comes up for an existing lot, which is already subdivided, and we've already approved or has been approved years ago before we were even here, then, then maybe that goes to the zoning board, but I guess the.
Well, that's what he
But then
just
you have two
described. If
different-
you went to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
zoning
yeah,
board,
that's
it
what I
would be a
said, that you have
special
two different
exception. If you went to the planning board, it would be a
But you
conditional
said
use
business
permit.
versus commercial, I'm just talking in general.
No, okay, yeah.
Yeah. But I guess
Just-
Linda's point,
There's no benefit to it.
I think, Linda
I
did
think
bring up a point, though, we should at least discuss our intent with the zoning board, just to make sure that they don't have some points contrary that we're missing. So it might make,
That would not happen until next month, because they just met on Monday.
Yeah, but that's a good idea.
well, we can at least
Because they need to
send,
be on the same page we are.
they should be on the same page, because if they're not, then it doesn't make sense to even propose it. I mean, we want people in sync on this, so, so I think, Linda bringing that up makes sense. We gotta.
I think from a zoning code perspective, we would certainly want their feedback on whatever this ends up being, but the difference of moving it from ZBA to planning board or back is a difference of 2 or 3 words.
Yeah.
You pull and plug special exception for conditional use
right,
permit. So we would definitely want their feedback on the criteria and on the outlay no matter what, I think.
Well, it wouldn't be their prerogative, as you said before, for special use anyway. They would be conditional use.
So
versus special
currently,
exception.
it is their prerogative because the zoning code says it's their job to issue these decisions as
Okay,
special exceptions.
But as an exception, right? I'm just saying,
When it comes to changes to the zoning code, that is not officially their prerogative, but we would want their feedback as people who are interpreting and administering the zoning code. If we were to make it a conditional use permit and not a special exception, that moves the ball from their court to ours.
And I think we'd want them to at least be nodding in agreement, or at least accepting of
Less
that.
work for them,
Yeah.
more for you.
At least give us a shrug, whatever.
Well, but, I mean, they might have some things that we haven't thought of that maybe, I mean, I
That's a good
spoke
point.
from my perspective, why I think it might be good to have it here, but they might be able to speak equally well from their perspective why it makes sense to keep it as an exception. So I think we should at least get their feedback on that
So
point.
when does the ZBA meet?
They are meeting the 26th, is it?
Monday before we do.
If I could just ask this, because I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. Because we don't have conditional use permits, and I've sat with the zoning board for many years through their special exception process. What would be the advantage to shift it from them to the planning board?
The
Because that's the part
advantage
I'm
would
not-
be that there's only one process that an
Stop shopping.
applicant has to
For the
go
applicant.
through.
The feedback I get is people don't like this back and forth and having to go 2 different places and stuff. I'm just taking that as feedback and saying, yeah, here's one case where we can make it right here.
I agree with Hal, because I've had it said to me similar things. Because our zoning code definitions are blanket. You have a steep slope. We define it as any area greater than 25, or whatever it is, 25%. So if you impact a tiny little area, you've got to go get a special exception. That is,
owners.
It's not,
it's
No,
not
the people
onerous,
I've
but
talked to
it's
say
it's
it's not,
hardship
like,
for the
terrible.
applicant.
it's like you
Or
had
a
an
small
additional
little
steps, an
area.
additional month or 2.
I understand that part of
Yeah.
it, but also
Yeah.
because,
She's asking about process
Right.
difference.
Yeah,
So
and-
So I would, the
So-
way I would see it would be that instead of having to go to 2 separate boards to get a special exception for that little area, that the CUP would be within the planning board as part of the application, even if it's just separately noticed.
That's,
I'm seeing that. But there will be times when they'll have to come to the planning board where that would not be something that you would have had to have seen if it doesn't relate to what you're doing.
correct.
Correct. Correct.
But also, I'm just curious about the fact that the planning board is now, has a responsibility within the zoning ordinance and how that plays out in terms of appeals, because the zoning board can hear an appeal on a planning board decision if it's related to the zoning ordinance. So now we could possibly loop back to our zoning board
So
for your decisions, which now that doesn't exist. Unless you tied a decision of a subdivision, site plan, or some approval, a mirror of the zoning ordinance, they would not have the authority to hear an appeal to your decisions. But by having that in there, I believe they could hear an appeal to a decision of a conditional use permit. Is that not correct?
Well, you're saying if we made a conditional use exception for, with an application, and but they didn't like quite the way we did it, or weren't satisfied with it, they
Right.
could go to the ZBA and get a special exception. But doesn't that
No.
still?
No.
If the
No.
planning board approved a conditional use permit, just like any other planning board decision, an applicant would have two opportunities to appeal it. They could go to Superior Court, or if the decision based upon how this board interpreted the zoning code, they can appeal it to the ZBA. But I think that in those instances, if the ZBA issued a special exception or denied a special exception and the applicant didn't like it or an abutter didn't like it, they would ask for a rehearing and the ZBA would be
It's a whole different
rehearing
set
it
of
anyway.
criteria.
Yeah, it is.
There has to be an error in law, or there has to be information
Right.
that was not provided at the time that has come to light that could impact.
Well, where's the
But-
I would
problem then that you're really
Right,
describing?
I'm just trying to look at all the ins and outs of making
Yeah.
that
But
change, because
But some of that's
do we
gonna
want all
happen.
our boards appealing each other and then,
What would we be appealing each other?
No.
That happens now. I mean, people try to go to the ZBA to get something that they are trying
no,
to.
they go to the ZBA only for an appeal to this.
Yeah, but I'm saying though that they go to the ZBA as sometimes the first or last resort now to avoid whatever might be the decision here.
So
No, they can't. They have to go to Superior Court.
No, but they
If an
do.
applicant or an abutter is dissatisfied with a decision of the planning board, they have to go to Superior Court.
We have applications all the time where there's already a decision made by the ZBA that's allowed
Right,
something.
Because it's
right. A decision of the zoning
The
board.
zoning
Okay,
ordinance,
but I'm just-
not
but-
site plan or subdivision.
No, but I'm just saying though that that's a,
That's their role.
they don't, what?
That's their role.
What do you mean that's the rule?
That's the role of the ZBA.
Yeah,
Is if if somebody doesn't meet the zoning code,
yes,
it's not a decision. If they can't meet zoning code,
which is
They
what, so, yeah, if we were faced with it, we would have denied it, so
exactly.
okay.
But
I'm
in
just
terms of
saying
the
this,
process for the
this
C-
little conflict or,
That's not.
exists now, I don't know that it would change a lot in this.
Well, it
So
does.
we'd
It
have, it
changes
does. We'd
the
have to
appeal
define it.
process.
That's exactly what that's what we're talking about.
That's what we're doing.
is
But
that
I
for
think
them-
Hal's point is that the effort to, if nothing else, if the process, the zoning code will be defined as whatever we rewrite it as, then somebody is going to avoid perhaps another month or two.
That's
So-
not
so-
my concern.
This,
Well, it may not be your concern, but
Let me
Hal's saying it would
suggest
be
this.
nice to streamline this, and I agree with you.
It's not
So-
streamlined,
That's
where
not
we
gonna
have
streamline
particular
anything.
knowledge, where we're dealing with the same aspects. I would not recommend doing this on other zoning board things that they rule on. This, I think, is a particular situation where it makes sense.
So there are plenty of other zoning codes that authorize conditional use permits instead of special exception. So it's a process that can work and can work legally. The issue is not that we can't do this, it's that we haven't done this. So we want to know what the unintended consequences are.
Exactly.
I can't list those off the top of my head right now, but since,
Disappointing.
Come on, James.
sorry,
No, but that is,
but since it's a very easy fix to put into what we are proposing, whether it's special exception or conditional use permit, what I can do is talk to people that have conditional use permits and learn more about that process and come back and we can have a more informed discussion about whether we actually want to recommend one or the other.
I think that would be good to have before we talk with the zoning board, so that we can go through that thought process with them too.
the unintended consequences here would be worth knowing, obviously, and I think Linda's point that there may be something here in the brew that would cause
And I don't
problems, but-
think that there would be anything that, Northwood would be sued specifically because they did a conditional use permit instead of a special exception. It's just making sure that everybody understands the process and what recourse they have to appeal.
Okay. Well, assuming
Well,
nothing
worst case
monumental, wait a
scenario.
minute, just assuming nothing monumental in terms of a problem of unintended consequences that we're overlooking, that's really something significant. The underlying point, I think, that Hal's making, that this would just facilitate an applicant's process, is the kind of thing we should consider when we can.
Sure.
Our job is not to make life more difficult for any resident, any applicant here before us. So, if it just makes life terrible for the staff and so forth in some fashion, or some other issue, okay, we need to consider that. But if not, I think making things a little easier for the applicant helps.
Here's the point I'm getting at. Worst case scenario, relative to how the boards would interact differently than they do today. If there was a development and you issued a conditional use permit for whatever it was that was going to happen, in a butter, depending on who the aggrieved party is, they go to the zoning board to appeal your decision, because that can occur now. It cannot occur the other way. If the zoning board approves a special exception, you cannot appeal that. But in other words, the appeal can't come to you, it would have to go directly to Superior Court. If it goes the other way, then the town would now have an attorney possibly for the zoning board, an attorney for the planning board.
Can, in this situation, do we
And
know
it
this?
it's
Do we know that a
happened
special,
before, when the planning board made a decision based on the zoning ordinance. That's why,
you know that a conditional
That's a
use
reality.
has
the
been
chances
appealed?
of that happening, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't happen.
Wait.
But that's a reality that is, you're
Linda,
putting in place by
Linda.
turning the
So
process.
Do you know that a conditional use has been appealed to the zoning board for a special exception? Do you know that that's occurred? Can those two, because that's what you're saying is,
No,
you're not-
It's
So
appealed
you would never have a conditional use permit and a special exception
in
for
the
the same
thing.
issue.
It's either or.
You would do one or the other. So at that point, the board would have made a decision on a conditional use permit.
right?
The RSAs provide that planning board decisions on matters of the zoning ordinance can be appealed to the ZBA. So at that point, it wouldn't be going to the ZBA for a special exception. It would be filing an appeal of the planning board's decision regarding this conditional use permit to the ZBA. And the ZBA could uphold your decision on that conditional use permit, affirm or deny, or they could overturn it, affirm or deny.
That's what they do in other instances already.
That's what they would do on anything where your decision hinged on your interpretation of the zoning code.
Okay.
Well, you don't typically do that, where now you're putting yourself into it by a conditional use permit.
We put ourselves into it in a number of decisions which can be appealed to the ZBA.
No,
No,
it's
Well,
absolutely not.
because I think you're confusing a variance with an appeal. If an applicant can't meet the zoning code, they go to the ZBA
So
for a variance.
the
We make a decision based on our interpretation of the code, and they don't like it, they appeal to the ZBA.
The example of a decision that you have made on the zoning ordinance recently was the case that we heard tonight when we were trying to figure out, is this driveway a structure or not? Those definitions reside in the zoning ordinance. And we were trying to figure out, can this go through this portion of the setback or the overlay without getting a variance and or a special exception from the ZBA. And we decided after all of this, based on staff's interpretation and your understanding, that you felt comfortable going forward with the application as it was submitted. Mr. Martin asked this board to reconsider its decision. At the same time, he could also have filed an appeal to the ZBA. Typically, and hopefully once we resolve some of these definitions to be clearer, the board's interpretation of those definitions shouldn't be subject to question. It should be as obvious as possible that you don't have to interpret gray area in the zoning code. Your areas of interpretation are the other two sections of code, site plan and subdivision. So our goal would be to remove as many of those issues where you are going to be interpreting zoning code where you're not specifically told to reduce those avenues for appeal.
Well, did Mr. Martin that you referred to, did he actually have any redress at the zoning board for that?
He had the opportunity to. He
Well,
didn't
that's
avail
what I'm
himself of the opportunity. He did not file any other appeals apart from.
As in a butter, he could have?
He could have.
Any butter could then appeal to the zoning board.
Okay.
And part of our discussion was, should he, and we said, the only way we're gonna really define a structure, or whether our interpretation that a gravel driveway is not a structure, because you yourself said, Mr. Martin said he thinks it's clear that the driveway is a structure and we can't put it in there, and you said, no, it's not clear, and we said, well, we're going based on what the town has voted on and everything
Like,
else.
down
So
in history.
it seems that it should be this way, but he could have gone to court and got that, tried to get it changed.
Right.
But he didn't, because I
Oh,
think
court, we were talking to the ZBA.
yeah, but he could have gone to court
He
too.
could have
Yeah,
gone to
could
the
have gone to
ZBA on
Get a
this
court
one.
on anything.
Right.
Either or, he had
Yeah.
the choice
The
to
Z-
go
That's
either
the
or.
thing, is the.
And that's why we said we're just gonna stick with our decision, because we'd just be trying to put ourselves in the place of the court. So we just said, no, just leave it go, and if somebody really
Well, we
feels-
interpreted it a certain way, and we defended that, and that was
Right.
the way it stood. But I'm just trying to get back to where we were before. If we can make a conditional use decision as part of an application, you're saying, well, this,
I'm
then,
just saying that, look at it from all different sides.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
all
oh,
I'm
yeah,
saying.
but you're saying that it could,
That there's no perfect
No
answer
surprise.
to this.
well, there's no
Everyone's
perfect
surprised.
answer to anything. That would be a safe.
So-
that-
From what I'm hearing, at least from the three members who are speaking, I don't say that as criticism, is that we would like the board is thinking of a definition of steep slopes overlay that excludes a minimal area. The question that we've
Defines a
been
minimum area where it doesn't apply, yeah.
Exactly. The question becomes how we want to deal with applications that do not meet, that exceed that minimum.
Where we want to make an exception or allow something different.
What do you mean exceeds the minimum?
Exceeds the minimum. If it doesn't, if you have a small area, it's not something we are going to deal with. If you have an
Right.
area that...
So what you're saying is for things that would require relief from zoning,
Yes.
what is the avenue for that relief? Is it to the
Exactly.
planning board or is it to the zoning board?
Right now, it's to the zoning board.
And I think what I can attempt to do is to have something put together next week so that I can send it to you and the zoning board, and if they have any knee-jerk reactions to, no, this is our thing, don't you dare take it away from us, or sure, take it and run with it,
Or please think about this.
they can talk about it the Monday before. If they have further thoughts after that, they can always send us information or come to a meeting once we actually get to the public hearings, because there will be more opportunities for feedback.
Were you suggesting
Is
that
there-
there's a community that may, or Linda was maybe, that, or a couple of communities may have experience with unintended consequences regarding?
Well, I think,
Sure.
I think,
I think it's
James
just,
said
it
it's-
would help to know what the process is. So I can reach out to people who know the process better than I do for conditional use
Or maybe
permits.
already doing this? Is there any?
I can call Chris Parker tomorrow and talk through appeals of conditional use permits. I will see him at my own planning board meeting next Tuesday, and if I haven't talked to him by then, I can talk to him there. So I'm not worried about being able to put together some sort of note that goes along with this that says, this is how things could possibly change.
Okay, let me ask it might be a rhetorical question since we've been talking about special exceptions and CUPs. Is there, in the information we've been given tonight, because we're looking at changing the definitions of steep slopes, a way to do just that without enacting a CUP? If we change the definition of steep slopes to exclude an area that from consideration, does that then give us the goal that we're talking about of allowing applicants to impact a certain maximum area of steep slopes without consideration? And if they do go over that, going to the ZBA still for a special exception as we currently have it? And if we chose,
Yeah, I think you should have some sort of, this is how these are the criteria for your special permit,
Yep.
no matter what.
Okay. So
The
if-
only question there is whether that section about the conditions for your special permit says conditional use permit from the planning board or special exception from the ZBA.
Okay, 'cause what
Right
I'm-
now, it says special exception from the ZBA.
so what I'm thinking offhand is that because I'm concerned of the time frame for getting this on before the voters, or in meeting the deadlines for public hearing and all that other fun stuff. Can we change the definition to give us essentially what we've talked about without defining the process or doing the process at a following year? So we essentially, no?
Well,
I'm saying-
honestly, it feels like we are going to be more or less rehauling or overhauling that whole section anyway, and just doing a repeal and replace.
Okay.
So I don't think it makes any difference from a timing standpoint whether my next draft says conditional use permit or special exception. And we can talk about it on the 29th
Right.
about whether that's a question we want to answer now or not.
Okay. I'm trying to see.
Well, let's put it this
Multiple
way.
options.
I will write it for a special exception.
Okay.
Oh, I was going
And-
to suggest write it the other way.
All right, I will write it
I
for a
think we should
conditional
try it.
use
I
permit,
think we should
and
try
we
to
can
move
decide
forward.
whether we actually want to take that plunge
Yeah.
on the 29th.
You better come prepared, sir. Mr. Moderator.
I already stated my case.
Well, you stated your case, but we then have to do the
So to
moving into process aspects.
to bring this back to
Yes.
some of the final things that I need so that I can actually go and write this thing.
Thank you.
It sounded like, for the most part, we felt pretty good about the conditions that Concord had as the criteria that you need to meet.
The 2A through E.
Yes. The one thing that I think
Page 2
they're
of 2.
Yes.
missing that is sort of screaming at me, so I would definitely add an F, is, unless it's in another section, they don't mention review by the Conservation Commission. That
Conservation
most,
Commission's mentioned elsewhere, but it'd be better up here.
so I would add that as an F. Review and comment by Conservation Commission before acting. It sounds like we are mostly good with how Dover is defining the area. We currently have a two-step or two-tier overlay. 20% to 25, you can get a special exception, and above 25%, you can't. Is that something we want to retain? And to lump this in even further, the delineation on the model from the innovative land use controls mentioned setting the bar for the overlay at 15%. So do we want to change the degree of the slopes to be more or less restrictive now that we're eliminating tiny areas, or do we feel pretty good with what we've got?
I tend to think the 15% is better, especially if we bake in the conditional approval.
Okay.
That would be where I would start to be a little.
So if you go from 20% to 15%, your overlay is going to get a lot bigger. And there
Oh,
are
I
going to
see
be
what
a
you're
lot
saying.
more areas that could potentially
Yeah,
be
we
impacted.
typically don't worry about that, right, you're right.
Well,
Just to
but
arbitrarily pick a number here, I mean, you have to consider what slope you're really talking about. A lot of places around here easily meet 15%.
I would highly recommend, before you make your decision, if you want to look at the impacts of special exceptions, take a drive up through Deerfield, down through Deerfield, go out Mount Delight Road. At the crest of Mount Delight Road, a subdivision has been put in. There are some houses, I forget the name of the road that is up there, but it's right at the crest where Swamp Road comes in and goes down to Epsom. Just beyond that, take a look at some of the driveways. to meet, we're talking mountain just to get a house placed at the top of the hill, significant erosion problems. Not saying it's great design, it met code. But there are, well, it was a difficult process because I was living in Deerfield and following the development up in that area.
Where is it relative to the Bede place?
Relative to where? Oh, the Bede place?
it's
Beyond,
beyond that.
beyond
It's
that,
up-
it's probably
up
a
the-
mile.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just as a point, when this ordinance was originally completely rewritten in '99 by Stratford Regional Planning, it was 15%, and it was later changed to 20.
Okay.
So, just a thought.
Yeah, I
Well, why
didn't know
don't we
that.
just put an A number in there or XX in there, and that can be part of the discussion.
Well, think,
18%.
Negotiating, yeah, okay. 18.5.
Most are nice round numbers. Those are
17.5.
easier
I
for
would
us.
highly,
17.5.
highly recommend that it's a multiple of 5.
Well, that is 0.5.
18?
Divide it by 0.5, you get 360.
Do you have other stuff to go through?
Okay, I guess.
If this was
No,
full, I
that's
would
the
throw it
second
in.
one.
Anyway,
Yeah, anyway.
Wouldn't
Okay.
waste your tea.
do you have enough to go on?
So I will write something.
Words.
It'll be fabulous, I'm sure.
I will do my best to parallel our current level of regulation, but and focus on the thought of narrowing down the criteria and setting that minimum area of impact.
I don't think we answered James's question, though, of we currently have 20% where you can get.
I think I will mirror the current ordinance
Okay.
and come with the idea that we're not going to make things stricter with this, but sleep on it. Because if you want to change it, it's probably better to
Do it then.
try doing this all in one go rather than.
Oh, yeah.
20 is fine.
20%.
So 20 times 3.
20% would be,
20%, that's where, you didn't let me finish it. Right now, we allow impacts for 20%, 20 to 25%. From 25% and above, we allow 0 impacts. I happen to like that model
but
myself.
at 20%, you need an
You
exception.
need an exception.
So
Yes.
20 to 25% special exception,
25%.
25% and up, technically you could go and ask for a variance.
You could go
But
what?
that probably would not
You can
be
go to the ZBA to get a
a
variance.
great idea.
Okay.
It's a more stringent set of standards, et cetera, et cetera.
With the 25%, the ZBA could still overrule that?
Technically, the ZBA could provide a variance for somebody to build something on a 50% slope. That's something that is just understood as an opportunity to seek relief. I would be surprised if they granted that variance.
I'm wondering to what degree we're allowing ledge situations where you might be able to build on a very steep situation. There'd be no erosion whatsoever.
That's up to the
Oh, I would-
planning board, not our discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's not
that would be a variance
Yeah.
request.
Yeah.
Right, and they'd have to prove that.
James said he's not putting anything in about cliffs, so that further excludes our ability
Well, the
to
bluff
weigh in on
includes,
that.
the bluff includes everything. It's kind of a bluff, you know.
Okay.
I have one item, but before,
we're not done.
Oh.
But go ahead.
I mean, under zoning ordinance.
Yes, definitely.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say we sent the other ones off that you gave your blessings to town council, and they came back 100% all set. So I just want the board to recognize how well our planner wrote those and drafted the language, and there was no changes. So we're good to go on that.
Very
Yay.
Yay.
Nice job.
Do you have a sticker for him?
Gold star?
I do.
I voted or?
Well, now,
Okay, so the item I wanted to bring up is, something came up in the last week or two, relative to a piece of property that was for sale. And the town of Northwood has been enforcing, a seasonal to year-round conversion under our zoning ordinance. And at this point, we understand from our attorney that without some additional definition within the zoning ordinance, we're on some real shaky ground because of a Supreme Court case which says that if you don't have the definitions between the two,
What, seasonal to
you're
year-round?
gonna have a tough time standing behind that.
Are you referring to that seasonal to year-round as the
Right.
term?
Seasonal to year-round
If all you
on a
have is,
non-conforming lot.
Rather than just saying.
if all you have is single-family dwelling, you can have a seasonal single-family dwelling, and you can have a year-round seasonal, or single-family dwelling, and if you don't distinguish between the seasonality, then,
What does seasonal mean? Yeah.
right, then if you interpret it to distinguish between the two, you're adding some stuff that's not there.
So basically, what we've understood to be the difference is that you could have a seasonal property that you went ice fishing, you went to the beach in the summer. It just is not tied to a season of the year, so to speak, but that a year-round dwelling is one which you claim as a residence, you can vote, you can register your cars and all that. But without further clarification in the zoning ordinance, we would be in a difficult position to continue to enforce it on non-conforming lots the way the town has been doing it.
Is this somewhat dependent on, and I'm thinking that the time frame, the time element is the issue here, how frequently or if, and I don't even know if that's a good one, but frequency, but how much of the year it's used?
No, it has nothing to do with it. But basically, in speaking to the town's attorney, she is willing to come up with some language that we could pop in there and add that would kind of shore us up.
Like what?
So we could continue to go forward.
It sounds like
We don't have it yet.
It
Okay,
sounds
but
like
why
the
isn't-
Tell her
simplest.
thank you. Tell her thank you.
I'm just trying to get your blessings to keep going with that, and we'll have it for
well,
you
if-
for next time.
If it's an issue, if it is an issue, then sure. Yeah, I mean, according to the legal advice. But why wouldn't the amount of use, I mean, since season, as you just said, doesn't have to do with it, then the amount of time it's used, and one of the elements would be
It seems
whether
like
it's claimed as a permanent
the
address.
simplest way to approach this is to add a definition, to define a new use, and to add it to the use table. So then we can distinguish between the two. So we're leaving it to her to find a defensible definition of seasonal and help us with
she's
that.
been through more court cases than we have.
Right,
Let her define it
Right,
and
because
then
it's
we'll know.
defensible
Yeah.
definition.
Yeah, and then it's
Yeah,
all set.
we don't want to guess at this. We
No,
want-
nope.
I mean, we might draft something, and the first thing we do is send it to the lawyer and say, is this defensible? Well,
She's like, no.
yeah, so why don't we just get the answer
Send it
directly?
back to her and ask her.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just get the answer and then
Yes, we
move
should.
on. Yeah.
Yeah. Motion to adjourn.
Oh, hold on.
No?
No?
Man, you cut Bob right off in mid-sentence.
Well, I mean,
You need to leave.
Oh,
I thought staff had,
No, that was,
The motion was in order.
Yeah, 'cause
There was no second.
he said 7:30.
Second.
oh, we got a second.
This should actually be fairly quick.
All right. I'll withdraw the motion for,
Well, nobody seconded it, so.
Betty did. B. Smith did.
Okay.
He's ignoring you, Betty.
She was
Final-
being,
this
she was
is
being
the-
sassy,
What I
that's
would
why.
like, purpose for this tonight is to receive comments and possibly approval on the 2018-19 CIP. Actually, this would be the 2019 CIP.
Can you
So-
email that as well to us?
Pardon me?
Can you email that as well to us?
Yes, I
Thank
can
you.
email this as well. Would you prefer an Excel spreadsheet or would you like a PDF?
Whatever
don't
opens up
care?
on my phone is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, the PDF.
Again, this is just my work. I'm not intending to share it without a lot of explanation. Things to note that anything that is in red, letters-wise, I did not receive a request for, but they were included in last year. The numbers are not included in this.
Is the red showing up just in the yellow as I look at it, or is it down there?
It doesn't, it shows better on my computer than it does on the screen. So items like I did not receive anything from the highway department or the transfer station or town hall. There are things though that were included in last year that are either known to me personally that we need, or that they are far enough out that they will eventually need. So things like the UNH road inventory, I happen to write the plan. I know that it is coming up for, here it is about to expire, so I put that in, even without the request. The server replacement, that's my professional area. You need a server replacement. We have the costs. I updated the cost and included in the plan. I can't speak about the other aspects of it. Okay.
There's some now.
Bob, maybe at the end of your presentation, we should have a discussion as to approach on non-responding, but let's go through
Yes. I
with
think that,
what you have there.
yeah, exactly.
and then we can
I
discuss
did not
it.
receive anything from the police department. However, having lived here many years, I think we can definitely say that
They're gonna want a cruiser.
they're going to want a cruiser and that the safety complex is an item for discussion, and that'll be, just let me hold on that for
The
now.
cruiser is in their budget this year.
Okay. These items are, let me see if I can increase.
That's
that
harder
for a
to
little bit.
read,
It is hard to read. It's a lot easier on my computer than it is.
Sure.
Yeah.
Replacement the engine, the scuba fill station, scuba gear, and then replace the ambulance, our fire department things. The
Do you have that,
school,
what year is that for? This year coming up? This scuba
replace the
gear?
ambulance is starting in 2019.
The gear,
The scuba gear is 2019.
okay,
The fill station is, and then the replace the engine starts in 2020.
okay, thank you.
So, the school, they essentially gave me the same plan that they did last year, which is fine with, because it was fairly complete. Okay. And I'm sorry you can't see everything on the screen at once, but all I did this time was to play with numbers, to balance out the 5-year plan between this heavy black line and this black dashed line is the 5-year plan in consideration. We got a total of 4.7 and a half, or
The
4.75.
2.5, is that the safety complex?
Yes,
It's 4.5
okay,
with a 20-year bond.
okay. With a 20-year bond?
I
Okay.
believe so, that's what we're looking at right now.
Is there like a committee for this, or just who all's involved in determining this?
No, there's a committee.
Okay.
I'm not on it, there's a
Okay.
committee.
Interesting.
I do believe that there is going to be a meeting next Thursday night here about the safety complex.
Okay.
They're gonna have several public hearings as well.
Uh,
I'm not
think
sure
next-
when.
And
Anyway.
I understand there'll be a flyer
Yeah.
that goes out in the Sun next Wednesday about it.
Let me adjust my
The bond
numbers.
is still up in the air, but I think they were talking about 20.
Where's that? That's why I like to, okay. Kills my plan. Okay. Well, I had it nice and balanced out, now I don't.
Well, 200,000 for the next 20 years, so.
Yeah. Well, that really sort of kills the whole presentation too, because it's no longer
I'm
balanced.
sorry.
Way to go.
The man came to our meeting like, what, 2 months ago, and he said between 4 and 5 million, so that's why I,
Sure.
4.5.
It has increased a lot. So,
I didn't make it happen.
Yeah, right.
I know
What was
it's my
4.5?
fault.
What was
On a
4.5?
sticker?
well, tell you
What was 4.5?
Safety
The safety
complex.
Safety complex.
No, but what man came to the meeting?
The safety complex, man.
Yeah. They hired an architect firm to do all that.
Yeah, I'd like a serious answer, just so it,
I don't know his name off the top of my
Okay,
head.
let me
Consultant, I think.
revisit this, and what I can do, and what I'd like for direction from the board, I guess I'm chair of the CIP, which is fine, is I'll have develop some additional documentation so that essentially there's a description for each project more than just a single line to say this is what it is, this is what the town has submitted, or this is what the department submitted, here's how we would pay for it. As an individual line, it would impact, you know, for instance, this is the library solar array, you know, it's $20,000, blah, 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 et cetera. It would be impacted, we'd be doing, you know, $6,700 for the fiscal years 2019, 20, 21, and just do a single 1 page or half a page of each project, and then show the overall plan. Does that sound something so it's a little more presentable than rather just a whole bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet? Okay.
If you bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet, people's eyes will glaze over and they won't look at it.
Yeah. The impacts for this, though, and this is something where I'll probably pointed more toward Ms. Boudreau than anybody else, is that if we adopt this as a planning board, it's an informational item only, but because the select board is the ones who write the warrant articles, or actually it's the town administrator at this point in time, there would be a recommendation from the planning board, again, if we adopt this, to the select board to say, as you're writing your warrant articles, please keep the CIP in mind for tax impact. But obviously you can't do that until the plan is up.
Right.
And I'll revisit like I said, I'll revisit the plan. What you saw up here is the annual cost that I'm trying to keep balanced. And I had it pretty, not criticism, don't think that, pretty good at taking at about 575, 560. But obviously when the impact of the safety complex
It's gonna make
messed
an
that up.
impact.
Sort of had a major impact because it was a lot more money than I expected.
How much do you have in there now, Bob?
What, in terms?
How much did you have in
He
it?
had
Total?
he had 2.5 for the safety.
Two
I had
point-
2.5 in
Right.
there.
Okay, so another 2 million over 20 years is another 100,000, but if that starts in another year or two, it's just the first couple of years that are off and the rest of them, then,
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
so I don't
And
think,
that's gonna run out to
I think your,
ways.
I think your overall work still stands intact,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
I'm not even sure it's worth adjusting the upcoming 2 years if that's the only change that we're considering. I mean,
Well, you're
certainly
making a-
welcome to, but
You're
what is the cost of that bond reflected in each of the years? Are you,
It's 300. No, I didn't change it. It's 316,000.
was there an interest rate that was
Yes.
presented?
I'm not on the committee. They haven't met with us. That
I
was just
included
the number that they presented to us with the chief of police 2 months ago.
I included
But they didn't
a bond of,
talk about interest or anything? when
They haven't come back to meet with us.
I included a bond of
Later
rate of
this month, I think.
3.5%.
the interest doesn't affect it that much. Jim.
Oh, yes, it does.
Oh, it did. Are you kidding?
Well, not at 3%.
Not that
Not
much
at
of 3%.
How did you get 3.5?
Because that's what's pretty typical at this point
For a 20-year?
For municipal bond, yeah.
for a municipal bond, yeah.
And we might have a stellar AAA rating, so maybe ours is only 3.
They might do 25 years. I don't know. That was just the number that they threw out that evening.
Maybe if Beth gives them a sticker, we'd be done at 2.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so at 316 is 3.5. We moved down, let's move up to 4, just for argument's sake. You're moving up $15,000 annually. So just a for comparison. That's 0.5%.
Yeah, but I mean, that certainly factors into this decision, but you just pick
Right.
something and we can always adjust.
Right.
And what I'll probably end up doing in a case like this is to balance out the difference between, you know, what I did here and there, is just to see if there's either moving a warrant article or putting some money down in a capital reserve fund or something to that effect. So, but that kind of aspect impacts the language of the warrant articles that are proposed.
But Bob, for like this safety complex, you could, like you said, forward load some of it by.
Forward something,
So
yeah.
you could, I hate to see you rework everything, because some of the stuff that you had there in the most recent upcoming years makes sense in terms of the order and the requests, and to readjust all those just because something's changed here. I
It
don't
won't
think
take,
that-
it'll take me half an hour.
Yeah, but I don't think it's,
Don't worry about it.
I think it's worthwhile the way it is,
Well, I
so.
don't, because the goal of the CIP is to minimize the impact, the tax impact from year to year. And
Right.
there are,
I mean, that can be a goal.
that can be a, correct.
The basic goal is just to make sure that you're planning for your capital needs.
Correct.
Um,
And for that,
Dover's definitely is not perfectly aligned.
but one of the interesting things that I see in this is, you know, that's 2028 with the safety complex, and I can't even, I forget what aspects though, but those are costs we're already looking at already, 10 years out,
Right.
$450,000 that we've already committed in 10 years. So that, as an example, you know, that's the kind of planning we're looking at. Okay, that's a replacement truck. Is that 60 grand for 3 years? But let me do some revisiting based on that information. That's good to know. And then I'll come up with the documentation, because some of those projects are going to change.
Right.
I do have to, I mean, but just please think about the idea of you yourself putting numbers in when somebody hasn't given you something. I'd be nervous about that. Somehow these numbers have a way of sticking, and I guess the second part of it is, from a, how would I say it? From a process perspective, and this is based on my experience in Hudson, we made it a rule. If we don't get the information, it doesn't go in. And the selectmen made the rule, if it's not in, we aren't doing anything with it.
Okay?
And-
What's the board's
And
pleasure?
over 3 years, we went from about a 15 or 20% participation to 100%.
Okay,
It was pretty good,
that's why I asked.
yeah, so,
What,
not everybody got the message the first year or the second year, but over the course of time, it was pretty consistent. But I don't know if you want to play hardball like that. I mean, that was,
Well, that to me is something that needs to be decided by the board and go to the select board and the town administrator to essentially be the whip to make sure that all the town departments answer. You'll notice that I only included 2 fairly small items that were not presented that I knew would definitely be coming back up in the
Well,
time frame.
there were several in red there.
There were 2
There were
in
two,
specific.
The police
There was only
car, the
2
police
items in red?
cruiser.
No, I think the
That-
red
that-
section
that I-
was the fire
that I
department.
carried over on my own volition.
No, I'm talking about the red, you had items with red print.
Yes, none of those except for 2 of them were included in the plan.
Oh, they weren't.
They were not included.
Oh, okay. No, then, I think you did the right thing. You're
we're on the-
highlighting that maybe somebody should or would like to submit something.
The reason I included them is because they were known quantities that they
For
could
those
distribute.
two.
For those two only.
But for the other items
The
in there?
others were not included in the plan.
No, I think that's, because we somehow have to get the message out. And one of my concerns is if they're not thinking about this already, when they come to the planning board in another few short weeks, if they haven't thought about it enough to give you the numbers, how good can the numbers be for the planning board then? Or, excuse me, the budget committee?
Exactly.
They can't be very good. So we need to encourage the folks to get it in and get it.
And the budget committee needs to
Yeah,
ask them.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to
Trust me,
mention
I'm going
that
to
part of
ask.
it.
I was going to bring up the budget committee.
The
too.
Budget Committee is meeting on the town's proposed budget on December 2nd, which their rules require 10 days out that everything is sent to them.
Okay.
And so unless this board votes to approve this tonight, then it wouldn't be part of the warrant articles that will be included on that December 2nd meeting. I think it's December 1st.
The town can
Because
still
it'll be
write the
being
warrants.
developed in the next few weeks.
Right.
The Budget Committee has sent a letter out to the selectmen and school board that they want the warrant articles
Linda,
with the proposed budget on the first meeting, the all-day Saturdays.
Linda, I want to make sure I understand what you're asking or saying. Are you saying that for the budget committee to have Bob's plan in hand and use that as part of their consideration, we need to approve it?
Warrant articles.
No, what I'm saying is if the town administrator, who's ever writing the warrant articles between,
Yeah,
and I don't know who's decided that, whether it's going to be a joint effort between finance and the town administrator, that they will be doing that, they will have to be doing that within the next few weeks. So if you don't decide tonight or give Bob authority to finish up his numbers, then this board hasn't approved that, and it really shouldn't be presented until it's approved by this board.
Approved what?
Approved.
Approved as a plan.
we've seen all the, well, I don't know if I've seen all 8 versions before this, but we've certainly seen several
We
other
have, yeah.
versions of this. And so the only thing that we've discussed changing
Is
tonight
that a
is the
requirement?
new input
Or-
from Beth, which you said you could adjust relatively easily.
That's relatively easy.
And then I guess I go back to what I said
Yeah, we can do it in
earlier.
the
I kind of
past.
like the way you had the other ones, and if you feel that you can adjust the numbers such, with this new information, such to keep everything otherwise just one step higher in numbers and keep everything else the same, I'd be comfortable with that, quite frankly. In other words, you would just be adjusting for the change in dollar value for this, and in doing so, you'd still somehow keep it equal across all the years, and
Even if there is just that jump when they start paying off the bond, or however we do
or
it. Or
just
pre-year or something like that.
some prepayments or something, or some.
Yeah, one of my criteria on this is that the CIP does not get yes or no judgment over a proposed project. It
Right.
is
It's just,
Yeah,
strictly
anything-
how it's funded.
Referring to prepayments or anything is not in the prerogative of this. I mean, that hasn't been decided by anybody.
Correct.
right, so.
There's
yeah, so
nothing has been
yeah,
decided on
Okay,
how to
but
do
you're
it.
suggesting, but
Well,
that's,
this whole thing is a suggestion.
yes, it is, and that needs to be real clear. And there's some open, as you mentioned already, the red lettered positions
Right,
should be left as
as empty.
clear, open,
Yeah,
no information available.
Mhm. Yeah, let me,
so I'd be willing to make a motion to accept it as shown with edits to reflect the additional money that Beth talked about for the safety complex.
second?
Before you vote on that,
Yeah.
James is trying to find out if a public hearing is required or if it's just a good idea. So
For CIP?
Mm-hmm. If we had more time, obviously, if
Yeah.
it's,
Huh.
it would be a good idea, but we want to make sure that
Well, I
it's
thought
not
this
a
was in turn.
requirement
That's a
before
good-
adopting it.
Joe. The company's called SMP Services. It's architect. And the guy's name is Jason Lacombe.
Jason.
It's,
When is that meeting? It's not coming for the safety complex bit?
It's,
there's a subcommittee that meets, I think, like every week, but I'm not on.
The subcommittee.
Scott, the chief of police, the fire chief. It's like a committee of like maybe 6 people.
I'm somewhat offended that the planning board's not involved.
Yeah,
I would even say.
found that out belatedly.
There's no mention of a required public hearing. You're good.
There you go.
They put an
Next
ad in the
year.
paper. People
For-
that want to be on the committee to write a letter.
I didn't see it.
I didn't see it.
It was in the paper, the Sun,
Yeah. it
over
was
the
a-
summer, yeah.
It was a while back.
Yeah, during the summertime.
You would have thought that would have been a standing offer, but anyway,
You should have sent an invitation.
Especially, yes, I
we
agree.
have a little bit of experience with this.
I agree with you, Bob, because, yeah, there was some previous experience which is not
Anyway.
on this current committee, except for the 2 vested interests of the fire chief and the police chief.
Have you found that yet?
I'm almost there.
Okay, sorry, I'm just,
It just says, we are hosting an informational night next Thursday
Okay.
at the safety complex.
Get out of here, I said I was.
And there'll be a flyer in next
okay.
week's paper relative to it.
Oh, and the meeting's Thursday night.
Thursday, that would be November 15th at 7, 6, 7.
I don't have a number.
Joe, before you go, there's still a motion and a second on the table for
Well, at least
Yeah, but I didn't second or make the motion.
Right, but your vote
You
would
need to
be
vote.
appreciated on the CIP.
And I think you're good to go if you want to vote on the CIP.
So,
Well, I don't, right now I mentioned to Bob I was leaving earlier and that hasn't happened yet, so
Bob mentioned he
there's
was
a
leaving
motion on the
earlier.
table to authorize me to make edits and final presentation for the CIP.
I think there's a working document, somebody, the original idea was this is something as a guide that others could look
Well,
at
let's
and
go
have
for
something
it.
to talk about in a perspective, and I think that's useful, and I'll vote aye.
Okay.
You didn't call the vote yet.
I did call the
Oh.
vote.
Aye.
Those opposed,
Thank you, Joe.
those abstaining, because I'm involved in it.
Good night.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you. I will work on that.
Thanks for all that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks for
It
your
is-
effort on that, Bob.
I like doing Excel stuff.
He said he loves it, there you go.
Well, but I want to make sure it's not just me. We'll get there. It is a multi-year process.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
What else do we have? Anything?
No.
Motion to
Correspondence?
adjourn.
There are blueprints to sign, or prints to sign?
She's trying.
And that's all, Daco, new plans, so.
New plans.
once we
Okay,
do-
so these need to
I
go
should have
out.
folded them, I didn't have them.
New plans?
Ooh, you're
Well,
gonna like
he-
those.
Amended
He
plan.
amended it based on comment, James's comment.
Does the town have copies of these, or this is everything?
We have several, I have, well,
Well, there's 10 copies there, I think.
and
So
then I
just
have.
each of you can
I
have
have
one.
10 for the
New
zoning board
Daco
too, so we
plans.
have.
Oh, these are the new DACO?
He does love his
Sorry, Gary.
plans.
Basically, what the change is that they added another bridge for a crossing rather
The
than
wet
a
ones.
I'm not
culvert or
gonna
whatever they were
distribute
gonna
those
do.
now.
Yeah, there was an issue with that. They had to go to the state, I think.
Holy moly.
I think they went to the state for that,
That was a
didn't
4-sheet, okay.
The Conservation Commission did
Oh.
review these and will be sending an updated letter
Okay.
to the
they? These don't look near as.
zoning board, and they've requested that it be CC'd to you because they originally had some other issues, but they realized that that would be part of the site plan, part of it with this board, so they will hopefully be participating in that process.
And
So grab your copy.
the sidewalk is still on for November 17th?
Correct. And this is on the agenda for the 29th. Anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Have a happy Thanksgiving.